Today on the Wrestling Roundtable, SummerSlam 2009, UFC's latest happenings, the best and worst of SummerSlams, and no porn talk. Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. It's been too long, and we're going to talk about SummerSlam 2009 after our introductions, of course. Sitting to my left, which is your right, Chris Harris. He's been a fan of 15 or 16 years now, and he's a vault manager. Sitting to my right, which is your left, Lawrence Haber, musician and fan of over 20 years, and Rodney LeConte, fan of 20 years and director of the Grappling Kings. I am your host, Eric Santamaria. I've been working in wrestling 5 years this month, and I'm also a videographer, producer, and editor, and host of the Roundtable. People are probably going to be saying, why are you talking about SummerSlam? Well, it was the second biggest show of the year, and we had some scheduling problems. We didn't get to talk about that or a couple other shows in the past couple months because this is our first real taping since August. So it's been too long, and we want to remind you that even though we didn't get to tape in that time, we've always been active on WrestlingRoundtable.com, so hopefully you've joined us there. If you haven't yet, go there. You can get the links to our MySpace, Facebook, and Twitter accounts as well, and support the show by getting a Wrestling Roundtable t-shirt, just like Kevin Carter from Beaverton, Ohio did. So thank you, Kevin, and thank everyone for joining us on the show, because we're going to be talking about SummerSlam 2009, as I mentioned before. What'd you guys think of the show? Was it a good show for the second biggest show of the year?
This SummerSlam just blended in with the past few SummerSlams. It was SummerSlam 2007 revisited again. You had DX, you had the same Cena-Orton match for the title. The Undertaker thing was cool, but it just shows that they keep going back to the Undertaker return because they know that people are going to pop for it. People generally like the Undertaker. He's still a good wrestler, but nothing that really stood out.
But he's been there 19 years next month. They can't be going back to him forever.
Not only does it blend into the SummerSlams, it blends into every other pay-per-view, which is unfortunate. For the second biggest show of the year, the first biggest show of the year wasn't that good to begin with anyway, so the bar is very low at this point, unfortunately.
Generally, we like to look at SummerSlam as the summer WrestleMania, the next big thing, and we had King of the Ring to be the catalyst into SummerSlam.
Used to.
And for the used to. And for the past few years, it hasn't really felt that way. They would do SummerSlam, and the next few pay-per-views would be SummerSlam revisited. The same matches, different stipulations.
If this is the biggest party of the summer, somebody in creative is extremely hungover because tonight they're still doing the same matches at bragging rights or whatever it's called.
Well,
This is 3 pay-per-views later.
You have to admit, though, that the pay-per-view started off real well because, as you like to call him, the pay-per-view MVP of the year, Rey Mysterio Jr. When we talked about his matches with Jericho previously in the year, which were unbelievably good, spectacular matches, you said at the time it was kind of giving the Intercontinental title credibility again, and I disagreed with you at first. But then we saw that it was continuing. They actually kept him as a strong champion with still good matches with Jericho. They also kept it on him when everyone expected Ziggler to win. And then when we had his suspension, they put him in a match with John Morrison that got tons of TV time. And it really seemed, up until they just stopped caring after Morrison got the belt, that they were really doing a decent job of getting the Intercontinental some credibility again.
They're working on it with the mid-level titles and the U.S. title now, too, as of today, that Miz is champion and is allegedly in the middle of a push and facing Morrison. The wellness policy got in the way of whatever they were building towards, but in hindsight, it ends to justify their means of getting Ziggler over and getting Morrison over, if only for a brief time, and Miz. I don't think they really do care about elevating those titles to making them titles that elevate to the World Champions, which they don't care about either.
Well, this Miz-Morrison match, not only are they former tag partners, former tag champions, they're both the Intercontinental and U.S. champions, so you'd think them fighting on pay-per-view, if it was Michaels Jannetty in 93, and they both had singles belts, tag team champions facing each other, it would have been a big deal. But it just seems like they're doing it too early. It's not as big as it could be.
That's WWE. Let's blow our wad in 2 weeks.
Well, speaking of blowing, the tag match with Jericho and Big Show, which, okay, fine. It is a good tag team combo. They've got nothing better for them to do. Put them together, it works fine. But when they're going against Crime Time, a tag team who should have won the belts 3 years ago, and they still can't win, people are saying as an excuse things like, but Jericho Big Show's really hot right now. Yeah, and they've been there 10 years each.
Well,
It's just a way to keep them both on Raw and SmackDown. Let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah, but they could
These
be doing that
belts
by themselves
are
anyway.
absolutely meaningless. Here's 4 belts. Carry this shit around rather than give them a new belt or come up with some new gimmick of you take one belt, you take the other. Something interesting. No, they threw the belts at these two, and Edge got hurt. It kind of worked out with Big Show. But we're just keeping them now on Raw and SmackDown and Superstars in ECW. It's an excuse to bend the rules of the brand.
I still think they have this rule where no more than 6 people can be in what's considered the main event slot at any given time. And they've sort of elevated Punk, and they've elevated DiBiase and Rhodes. What do we do with these other main event heels? We don't know what to do. So let's just have them win the tag team titles and flirt with guest hosts for a few months. That's the only reason why they have the belts. It's kind of elevating them as a team and elevating the fake tag team titles that they have too. However, the only reason they have those belts is, like you said, they have nothing else to do with the belts or the 2 wrestlers.
Yeah, they're elevating them to a point, but we're now back in the 99 era where we have put together tag teams as a tag team scene.
Oh, yeah.
With Crime Time, though, they really need those belts to go to that next level. They're one of the last legit tag teams out there, and win for them.
At least in
SummerSlam.
WWE.
Yeah, we're talking WWE.
It's just guys thrown together, everything.
Who knew after 10 years when Big Show and Jericho were the 2 biggest free agent signings WWE had, they would be in a thrown together tag team, or thrown together tag titles.
Well, I love this reasoning that this keeps them both on both shows as if they ever need a reason.
Well, with his bragging rights, one versus the other, it adds to the drama.
Going back to DX, was anybody else surprised that they didn't outright squash Cody Rhodes and DiBiase? That it was more or less a competitive match until the end when they still win?
Not so much, because they're pretty high on DiBiase and Rhodes. I think they wanted to make them look good, and they proved that in the pay-per-view after by having them actually beat DX in the submission match. But I knew for their comeback match, there was no way they were going to lose.
They would inevitably win the feud, win the war.
Right.
But I don't think they're high on DiBiase and Rhodes. I think they're just high on DiBiase.
You never hear rumors that Cody Rhodes is going to be the one to beat Undertaker
Exactly.
at
And
WrestleMania.
interestingly, Cody Rhodes is really over as a heel right now. I don't think they ever intended for DX to come out of that feud on the short end of the stick.
No,
People are saying, like, they really showed that they're the veterans now and they're not trying to be these cool kids. But then the next week they're with Ben Roethlisberger doing crotch chops with defensive linemen and Cedric the Entertainer. So,
Does anybody else notice in the past few years there's been a big drop-off of us watching WWE starting pretty much in the spring? We come back for SummerSlam, but after that we're pretty much done up until the Rumble.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Because every pay-per-view is the same. What's the point of driving to Hooters and wasting gas money?
When you see shit on Raw, like Triple H beating Cena clean right before he goes in the main event of an Iron Man match, you just shake your head and change the channel.
Some of these great pay-per-views, I have bought into it without actually buying it. Because Unforgiven, No Mercy, those shows, even Armageddon, when those things would come up, be like, yeah, these are the shows we can definitely miss because they're built up with 2 weeks. But then you're curious to see the Hell in a Cell matches, the Iron Man match, the whatever,
I wasn't.
Breaking Point or whatever it's called. You know, these
Plus, this time of year, there's more interesting stuff to watch.
That's
Football,
true, too.
baseball
Right.
playoffs, Simpsons, anything else.
Family Guy for Eric.
DVDs, anything.
AM radio.
Well, unlike WWE, UFC seems to always get us interested. The payoff is a little different, and we're going to be talking about that when we come back. UFC's latest happenings when we return.
2 competitors, 1 mat, 1 winner.
A fight minus the elements that people typically associate with a fight.
It's a wrestling-based way of fighting.
Grappling is submission-based, it's takedown-based, it's close contact-based.
It's exciting, a little bit scary.
MMA is basically founded on grappling.
I'm glad to know that they are picking up jiu-jitsu more.
Grappler's Quest is pretty known. I mean, it's a pretty big deal.
Grappler's Quest basically has had the best competitors and mixed martial arts fighters in the world compete for us.
I want to experience that.
You could really, dismantle somebody without even harming them at all.
We've proved already that people love to see grappling.
And we're on our way to show the world what grappling can be about with excitement.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. Joining us to my right, which is your left, Team Oliveira trainee and MMA fan of 7 years, Martin LeConte. Thanks for joining us once again, and we're going to get right into the latest UFC pay-per-view, which happened last night, 104. Now, the original title was Machida versus Shogun. I think it could have been called UFC 104. Bullshit. Live on pay-per-view.
Pretty much.
Because really,
there was a bunch of bad calls.
Not a misjudgment.
Bullshit decisions.
Well, we'll get to that. First one is Ben Rothwell and Cain Velasquez. Cain Velasquez undefeated, and a lot of people are saying that Ben Rothwell, who's former IFL champion, just getting into UFC after 10 years fighting, was kind of screwed. Was it too early a stoppage?
No. Well,
yeah, it was too early. I mean, Cain Velasquez showed really good wrestling. I think he was on his way to win the fight, but it was stopped very prematurely. Ben Rothwell clearly showed that he was still conscious, he was still very active. He was on his way standing up when the fight was stopped. Very premature fight, and it's disappointing.
But could you say it was understandable, though, because he wasn't responding intelligently or anyway to those punches, and he was getting dominated. He wasn't even putting up his hands.
But this guy has 36 fights. He's experienced. He's a veteran. He shows that he has a tough chin. He could take a good amount of shots.
He wasn't on the ground getting those hits. If that had been a different story, he was on his way back up. How can you call that?
He was on the ground getting hit in pretty much the entire first round.
He was getting up, though. He was up against the cage. He had one leg up. He was getting up.
You could argue that he was warned because Mazzagatti did tell him, I'm not going to let you take any more of those shots into the second round.
He did, yeah.
Well, Velasquez was in the title contention more or less because he was originally going to be fighting Carwin, and both are undefeated, and people were saying these are two heavyweight prospects, undefeated guys who might be getting a title shot once we see who wins. Of course, we know that Carwin's fighting Brock, and we'll get to that later on, but Velasquez in this fight looked really impressive, throwing around Rothwell like he was nothing, this bigger guy, and he was just taking him down at will, punching his face off. Even if he wasn't happy with the decision, he earned that victory, I would say.
He would have won.
He would have won on the cards, no doubt about it, but that was a little early, I think, to call it.
Well, it looked like either way he was seconds away from victory. However, the main event with Machida and Shogun Rua went the distance. And I would say that we were in shock.
Yep.
Because first of all, we didn't know if it was going to be a unanimous decision or not. We thought it would be split because at some point in the earlier rounds, it looked somewhat even. However, I think most people with brains and eyes that function would say that Shogun won that fight.
Oh, definitely.
Because I don't know what fight those judges were watching. Because when I heard unanimous decision, I thought it has to be Shogun. When they said Machida, I thought, bullshit.
You saw the fight. How many leg kicks did Shogun throw at him? A lot. Maybe Machida did throw like a couple good knees, but...
Well, there's situations where people might say, this guy looked like he lost the fight, but he clearly won. For instance, Tank Abbott and Don Fry. Tank Abbott destroyed Don Fry's face, but Don Fry decisively tapped him out and beat him. So even though he looked like a bloody mess after the fight and Tank Abbott didn't, he clearly won. I don't think that was the case here because Machida looked like he lost, and I think he did.
Without a doubt. There was no way he won that. I agree. I don't know what the fuck they were watching on that show.
Exactly.
I really think these athletic commissions really need to train their judges properly because I don't know if they're thinking that Shogun didn't do enough to beat the champion, but when they're judging these fights, they have to look at it as two guys. Not one guy's the champion, one guy's the challenger. And the challenger has to do so much to be the champion. They really need to educate their judges more.
Well, this wasn't a Rashad Evans-Machida match where Rashad was afraid to get in on Machida. No. It was the complete opposite where I think Shogun was pushing the fight. But one thing they are pushing is Kimbo Slice on The Ultimate Fighter. Has anybody, and this includes everybody watching the show, has anybody watched The Ultimate Fighter since Kimbo and Roy Nelson fought?
Nope. Yeah, I have. Yeah. I've always been watching The Ultimate Fighter, though. I watch
all right, fine. I'm not one of them, because you know I don't like watching reality TV because of how fake it is. That's why I like wrestling. But this season, of course, had Kimbo Slice on it, which was the big draw, and that's why they did that rating against Raw that beat them for the first time when they had the big Roy Nelson-Kimbo fight, because those were the two biggest names that they had on the season, and they sort of blew their wad early in the third week. This was the third fight in for this season. I don't know about you guys, but has there been one good heavyweight fight this season yet?
There actually has been a good couple after the
Kimbo one.
I don't think so. They've all pretty much been one-sided. Rashad's team, and nothing that's really been back and forth like you've seen on some of the past seasons.
Obviously, Kimbo is a draw, and pretty much always has been since he exploded onto the scene. We know already that he's going to be fighting in UFC regardless in December, with the rumor being against Houston Alexander. Should Kimbo, who really didn't show he improved or learned much at all in this last fight, should he be getting into the UFC regardless, not even having won?
I think so. I think he did show a little bit of improvement throwing the leg kick, but Roy Nelson is
one kick.
Yeah, but Roy Nelson is a black belt. I mean, he beat Frank Mir to Grappler's Quest. This guy has very underrated jiu-jitsu.
Well, of course, he's not what he looks like. He looks like a beer-drinking hillbilly, but he's actually a very skilled fighter.
And to have that heavy fighter, Kimbo was outweighed by 30, 40 pounds. But I think if they kept it standing up, it would have been a more interesting fight.
Kimbo would have knocked out.
I think on the stand-up, it was back and forth. I would give the advantage to Kimbo on the stand-up ground.
Well, that's because Kimbo, like I was saying, probably should have gotten into boxing, because once he gets on the ground, he's pretty much useless.
But hopefully the training at American Top Team will help him with that.
We'll see about that. But with the rumored Alexander fight, do you think Kimbo even has a chance?
No.
Kimbo at 205 could actually be interesting.
Everybody knows his weakness. Just get him on the ground. It's not difficult. And it didn't even take that to knock him out last year.
But that's been Houston Alexander's weakness as well. Every time he's on the ground, he hasn't done fairly well. That's why he has been in the UFC.
So we're going to see a really shitty fight.
Well, no,
I think so.
It's either we could see a very bad ground fight, or it could be a very good stand-up fight, because I think they're both very explosive standing up.
Of course. And like last night with Machida and Hua, they were pretty much striking each other. There was a minimal of takedown attempts. There were no takedowns at all, and they pretty much stood up the whole time. So I think Kimbo and Houston would probably stay to their skill level and stay up and try to explode on each other with some elbows or some strikes or whatnot. Talking about heavyweights like Kimbo was, and UFC's Ultimate Fighter season is the heavyweight. The undisputed heavyweight champion, our boy Brock Lesnar. I wanted to talk about this fight now because, as everybody should know by now, next week is going to be our season finale. We're going to be off until 2010, and in between that time, Brock's next title defense is coming up against Shane Carwin. Are we scared?
A little bit, because his past victories, he's won on size and wrestling. Carwin has size and wrestling, and he has knockout power. Lesnar's chin has been tested a little bit, but not with someone with the power of Carwin. And I'm a little bit nervous.
Yeah, the thing is, Carwin hasn't fought that guy yet. You look through the list of people he's fought, he hasn't fought.
But he's also been knocking out these people.
He's been knocking out people in under 2 minutes. I've always been wrong, I think, on every Brock prediction so far. So I'm going with Carwin. He's going to get him probably in the second round. I think Brock's going to make it at least through a round with him.
Well, every time we go into a Brock fight, I'm always super nervous because he's always going up against skilled fighters. Frank Mir beat him, former UFC champion, of course. Randy Couture, I don't even need to say it. Heath Herring, Pride contender.
Yeah.
Now he's going against Carwin. I'm like, fuck that. I'm not going to be scared. He's going to knock him out. Then I watched Carwin's last several fights where it took me about 2 minutes to get through like 3 or 4 of them because he's knocked everyone out in the first round. He has got great striking, great boxing, and he's a national wrestling champion as well.
Right.
Can Brock stand with Carwin?
I think he could. Brock's got good stand-up too.
A lot of people say he doesn't, though. He has landed a couple good shots and knocked people down, broke Heath Herring's orbital bone, as we know, and knocked Randy Couture down as well with what some people say a lucky shot. But I wouldn't say that his stand-up is on the level of Shane Carwin either.
No. Not yet, but Brock is a super freak athlete, and I'm sick of underestimating him. Yeah, everyone really goes against Brock because he's very inexperienced, and Carwin is 11-0. But he's training hard. He's always comes up with a good game plan. That's what's good about Brock. He's a smart fighter, even with 4 fights. I think he's going to pull it off.
Is Brock's point valid that he's beaten better competition than Shane Carwin's fought? Because Carwin, although he is undefeated, his only claim to fame so far is he's Gonzaga, whereas at least Lesnar's beaten big names. So is Lesnar going to have the advantage here?
Lesnar's going to have the advantage of beating those people.
This is Carwin's first big fight. You never know. Nerves could get him. Anything could happen.
Well, anything can happen in WWE, or so they've claimed to us over the years. And
anything can happen that we've seen 10 times already.
And we're going to go back into history because we're going to talk about the best and worst of SummerSlams when we come back.